everyone, and welcome back to the Heal with Kat podcast. My name is Kat, and I am your host, and I am so excited to welcome you to this week's episode. If you are somebody who has always questioned happiness, is happiness real? How can we achieve it? Is it a consistent emotion? What should my expectations around happiness be? I don't believe I can be happy. All of those things are going to be challenged today in my interview with author of Good Mood Revolution and happiness coach, Matt O'Neill. And I have to tell you guys that when he reached out to me on Podmatch to have this conversation, I was like, personally, I'm super interested in hearing about your story and your book and all of the things that you teach. But my community cares about this in relation to ancestral healing. If you can bring the two together, happy to have you on the podcast. He was like, it's literally the first chapter of my book. Let's do it. All expectations far exceeded. I mean, it's just, we start off the conversation today with the ancestral part of it, and it will blow your mind. And also, it will be very inspiring for you if you are somebody that hasn't really dove into your family's story or beliefs or patterns around happiness. Matt is really going to inspire you with that. So we talk about ancestral blocks for happiness. We talk about the experiences that our ancestors might have that can block our happiness epigenetically, even going back 3 or 4 generations. We talk about the victim mentality and if happiness is achievable or possible by being a victim or being in a victim mindset. We talk about what the real definition of responsibility is. Blew my mind. We also talk in a roundabout way what happens if we ignore living and experiencing happiness. Because in order for us to create patterns of happiness, we need to believe it and we need to live it. And that's what breaks generational cycles of unhappiness, is living it through our body and the epigenetic components to that. So happiness is possible, and Matt is going to give you tips, tools, tricks, advice, knowledge, wisdom, you name it. He's got it, and a book that will tell you how to live in more happiness. And then personally, I had a conversation with him around the kind of difference between happiness and contentment. And at the very end of the episode, we get into the difference, the yes and all of it, because I feel like I've heard so many people in life say, you can't have happiness and you can't, it's better to go for contentment. He breaks that stigma completely. We talk about his book. We talk about so many wonderful, like I said, habits, tips, tools, tricks to up-level your life and rediscover happiness and your relationship to it. So if this is a conversation that you are drawn to, you're going to love it. It's going to be inspiring and empowering. And with that, enjoy this week's episode, guys. And don't forget to rate, subscribe, and review the episode if you love it. I'm giving away a free ancestral intuitive reading once a month to anyone who rates, subscribes, and reviews the podcast. All you got to do is screenshot it, send it to me in my Instagram DMs, and I will announce the winner on the last day of each and every month. So with that, enjoy, guys. Sending you my love, and see you next week. Matt, welcome to the Heal with Kat podcast. Everyone, please give a warm welcome to Matt O'Neill, author of Good Mood Revolution and happiness coach. Welcome.
What's up, Kat? I'm so happy to be here today.
I'm so happy you're here too. Talking about happiness. It's going to be a really great conversation. When we matched on Podmatch, ironically or coincidentally, a couple days before, I had been making the bed and I was thinking about what is the difference between happiness and contentment and which one is actually achievable? Which one should we be striving for in our lives? And then you reached out and I thought it was so synonymous. So I'm really excited to have this conversation today.
Well, what if we could strive for both contentment and happiness?
I want to hear more about that. I think we're going to dive into that today. I've got a handful of questions for you. But before we dive into your philosophy, your experience, and all of the wisdom and knowledge you're going to share, I would love for you to tell the audience and the community a little bit about who you are and how you became a happiness coach.
Yeah, I became a happiness coach from a lot of unhappiness. So like no one studies happiness who already has it down, right? And this really just came from generations. My family is from Ireland, Matt O'Neill, and my grandfather's parents were part of the potato famine in the late 1800s. And I mean, it was awful. 1 million people died in Ireland because they starved, and another 1 million left Ireland trying to come to New York City to have a better life. And my family was one of those people that packed up everything, sold everything, said bye to everyone they knew, and got on a boat in the worst conditions because they couldn't afford good conditions. And on that boat, my great grandfather's mom contracted tuberculosis, and she passed it to her eldest son, and they both died shortly after landing in New York. And so now my great grandfather's just got my grandfather, and they're here on the streets of New York. It's the early 1900s, and it's tough. You're in a town, you don't know anyone. He had an accent. All these people from Ireland came into New York, and they had these Irish accents, and they were taking jobs for anything. So they're undercutting people who were already here, who also were immigrants, but kind of forget it that they were also immigrants. And so they discriminated against them. My great grandfather, he started drinking. He lost his wife, he lost his eldest son, everything he knew, his homeland, and the only job he could get was shoveling horse manure at the police station. And he just thought, where did my life go? How did it go this bad? And he ends up one day at work, he gets kicked in the head by a horse and he dies. And so now 8-year-old John O'Neill, orphaned on the streets of New York. And when we're young, we think everything is happening about us. So he believed that he was unworthy of his mother's love because she died. He believed he was unworthy of his father's love because he was drinking and he was beating on him. He believed he was unworthy of anyone to care for him or protect him because there was no one. This is the emotion of shame. This is deep emotion that I'm unlovable and I'm unworthy. None of it was true, but he just thought it was true. So, there's some good things that come from this too. He became hard and resilient. These are some attributes that have been passed down. We want to talk about generational trauma. So of course, shame was passed down, and I'll talk about that. But there's other stuff. There's good stuff. This fighter spirit, this I'm going to make it work. I'm going to figure it out. This like sheer determination that he had to continue to survive got passed down as well. And that's something that I'm very grateful for because I inherited that along with some of the bad stuff. So when he was 15, he got off the streets by enlisting in the army with his dead older brother's birth certificate. And that was great because they were feeding him and he had friends, and the army was a good place for him. And then, this is what happens when we have a lot of shame, this feeling we're unlovable, is that other people that feel that way kind of get attracted to us and we're attracted to them because our vibe is our tribe. And so he met my grandmother, whose parents also had abandoned her. Her dad also died of tuberculosis. Very interesting. My grandfather ends up contracting tuberculosis in his 70s. I never met him. He died before I was born. And then when I was 8 years old, I also contracted tuberculosis. No one knows how. I'm an 8-year-old. Every single person in my school had to get tested for tuberculosis. I was the only one who had it. It's super crazy. This generational stuff it's way more mystical and spiritual than most people want to give it credit. So he meets my grandmother, and the two of them both just thinking they're unlovable. Her dad had died when she was 1. Her mom gave her away because it was early 1900s and she was a single 19-year-old mom, and you can't get a job. Women weren't going to college. I don't even know if women were voting in 1908. It just wasn't a time to be a single 19-year-old mom with a 1-year-old, and so she gave her away. And so my grandmother grows up without a mom and without a dad and thinking the same thing, I'm unlovable. And they have 2 kids, both sons. One of them's my dad. Now, here's the thing. We pass it down. Sure, it gets passed down in our genes, but we also pass it down with our actions. So my grandmother had never been held. She didn't hold my dad. They neither had really their parents' love. So they didn't know how to love their kids. What they did know is the world is a hard place and it's going to beat you down. So before you get told you're not enough, we'll tell you you're not enough. That was how it was passed down to my dad. They said, you're not worthwhile. And they weren't doing it to hurt him. They were doing it so that he wouldn't find out and be blindsided in the world like they had been blindsided. And so he grew up thinking he wasn't lovable. And then he met my mom, and my mom had her own things, but my mom's like one of my best friends in the world. And they fell in love. And then, but when I was born, my dad was saying, you're not enough. You're not lovable. And there was nothing I could do to earn his love or appreciation. And so I kind of believed it too. When you're a 5-year-old and people tell you this with their words and their actions, you believe them. And so that started this journey of me being on a bunch of bad moods. And later in my life, I'm trying to like achieve my way to greatness. I'm like, if I could just get great achievements, if I could make wealth, if I could do well in school, then maybe people would see I am worthy, I am lovable. And so I had tried to have a lot of achievements, and I did, but still deep down, I didn't feel like I was worthwhile. And so it turned into a bunch of addictions, trying to fill this hole. And thankfully, for me, it's God. Somebody's looking out for us. The universe is looking out for us. God was constantly putting people in my path that were there to help me. And one of them was my cousin, Debbie. My cousin gave me the movie The Secret. And she said, Matt, you should watch this. And I watched it and I was just floored. I'm like, wait a minute. All the bad stuff that's happening is because of my thoughts and my emotions. Like I'm attracting all of this stuff to me, this negative stuff, that it's just because of the way I'm thinking. And like a light bulb went off. I thought if I could just think more positive, if I could have positive, happy feelings, then all of a sudden I'd start to attract a bunch of good stuff in my life instead of bad stuff. And that's actually how it works. So I worked for like decades. Now it's been almost 2 decades of how to be in the most positive states possible. And I discovered that there's really an emotional ladder. The lowest of the emotions is the one that my grandparents and my father and then I inherited. This emotion of shame is the lowest one. And so the book starts out with the story about this and about shame, but shame's just a lie. This idea that we're unlovable is just a lie. The truth is we're all lovable. We're all being loved. We're all being supported. We just don't always recognize it.
Oh my gosh, that was a really profound story. I mean, your understanding of the generational patterns and being able to go back and really see everyone's experience for what it was. I'm sure that, well, it sounds like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like it helped you to kind of separate your inherent value from these beliefs that got passed down to you and you reconnected with your truest self. Is that what you went through?
You nailed it. You nailed it. So the first actionable thing that we can do, and this is what I teach each of us to do, is all of us have been hurt, but the person who hurt us, if we can find out their pain, if we can see it, we can start to understand them, and then we can start to forgive them. When I was a teen, I couldn't forgive my father. In fact, I stopped talking to him because he was really abusive. When I was in my 20s, I still couldn't forgive him. I said I did, but I didn't. It wasn't until I traced this back and I saw that he actually had it way harder than I had it because his parents had it harder than he had it. And all of it was just these innocent mistakes. Like my great grandparents didn't mean to die. I'm sure they still wanted to stay alive and care for their son. But this is what happens, is that sometimes life is hard and then children make some poor belief decisions and then it kind of gets passed down, but it's all just an innocent mistake. And so by these innocent mistakes, these innocent beliefs, these innocent things were believed and then passed down to me. I saw my dad and I was like, you didn't mean to pass that down, but how else could you have been? There in the 1940s and the 1950s, when he was being raised, there wasn't YouTube to improve yourself. There wasn't podcasts, maybe there was the book Think and Grow Rich and How to Win Friends and Influence People, but there wasn't like a whole self-help world of men didn't talk about their feelings. So it fosters a lot of forgiveness, and forgiveness then starts to open our heart in some really positive moods. That's the first thing I would urge our listener to do, is think about the person who hurt you and find their pain. And you may find some compassion and forgiveness for them.
That's the beauty of family constellation therapy, is you're literally stepping into the energy or the feet of these people in the family system, and you're getting a real, true, authentic look at what was your mom's experience within the realm of whatever you're going through and how that was passed down. And what I love is that people come out of those sessions realizing that it actually had nothing to do with them. They were trained to believe these things about life. They were inherently nurtured into these certain behaviors and beliefs. And it's a beautiful moment when you see the client, and as I'm seeing with you in your story, make that higher self to the lower self kind of observation and maybe even separation of some kind temporarily. Like, oh my gosh, my wounding. I'm looking at it here with these higher eyes, this higher perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But what I hear you saying and your story and everything is really that happiness is actually more tied to worthiness than anything else.
Well, shame is one of the 8 destructive emotions. It's the most destructive one. So the lie of shame is I'm unworthy, or I'm unlovable, or I'm not enough. And each of these 8 negative emotions has a lie. If we believe that lie, it's true for us. Whatever we believe is true. So when I believed I was unworthy of love, I thought I was unworthy of being loved. And every girlfriend I had, if they loved me or not, I would cheat on them and push them away. And then they wouldn't love me. And it would manifest this truth that I was unlovable. Of course, it wasn't me that was unlovable. My actions were. But my actions were driven by this belief that I was unlovable that then was creating actions that made me actually unlovable. Once I healed the wound, thankfully I did it before I met my wife, Katie, then I was able to act in ways that were integrous and keep the love that I had that was real and authentic.
So take us through the 8 primary bad moods. What are they? How do you get rid of them? I'm sure you talk about this in your book. So tell
Yeah.
us.
Well, that first one we just talked about, and one way to heal it is to see that any of these negative I'm unworthy beliefs are innocently inherited, either through actions or words or through our genes, but we can heal it by starting to say the truth. And this is just affirmations. And I'm a huge affirmation fan. They've changed my life. Finding that wound and saying, okay, I feel unworthy, and then saying, well, how do I want to feel? I want to feel worthy of love. Okay, well, that's an affirmation. I'm worthy of love. If we say that every single day, at first it may feel inauthentic, but eventually it's going to start to feel normal. And then we're going to start to find all these results in our life that show us that it's actually true as well. And then it starts to just become our truth. The next negative emotion is the emotion of guilt. And man, our whole country runs on this, because the opposite side of the coin of guilt is judgment. Guilt is self-judgment and it comes from, again, we're children and our parents are like, why did you do that? I can't believe you messed that up. And they punish us. Well, when we grow up, we still have a parent. It's just our mind now that's saying, why did you do that? And you always mess this up. And we punish ourselves. We punish ourselves with guilt. And then you see guilt with people when you see really judgmental people. When somebody's always judging everyone else, that's just an external experience of their internal guilt. I recommend that if anytime you catch yourself judging someone, that's the start to healing guilt. Every judgment is actually our own guilt externalized.
Wow.
If we didn't have guilt, we would have no need to judge someone. That's just someone who's doing the best they can.
It lacks compassion.
Yeah, right. So, sometimes people make mistakes. I make mistakes. We all do. I don't need someone else's judgment or commentary. I'm totally okay with somebody's loving correction, that somebody actually wants good for me and that doesn't just want to put me down and tell me how awful I am. I'm okay if they care about me and say, hey, that thing that you're doing, it could be harming some other people. Let's look at doing it a different way. I care about you and I care about the world. That's a great way, but we can correct people without judgment. So this idea, though, that guilt is going to help us is the idea that we need to dispel. It's like we think if we're really hard on ourselves and we punish ourselves for doing things wrong, we'll stop doing it. Well, I've got 4 children, and my oldest daughter, when she was little, I was cooking dinner and she wanted to cook with me. She, by the way, is a phenomenal cook. She's always been interested in it since she was very small. So she's like 2.5, and I'm cooking something on the stove. And she reaches out and grabs the burner. And her little hand is blistering instantly. She's screaming at grabbing this hot burner. And I've put it under water and I have her hold an ice cube and just big crocodile tears rolling down her face. And then I got in her face and said, why did you do that, you stupid little girl? I'm kidding.
I was like, wait, where is this going? I was like,
I held her in my arms and I said, I'm so sorry, honey. I'm sorry I wasn't there to protect you more. Here's the interesting thing. I never screamed at her. I never told her she was stupid. I never said that was awful. And she never grabbed a stove again. So we're really smart, us humans. And when we make a mistake and it hurts, we don't need to punish ourselves or tell ourselves that we're stupid or that we're awful or that we're messed up. We don't need to judge ourselves. The mistake and the consequence is enough for us to learn and to correct our action. And this guilt, this idea that if we just punish ourselves, we won't do it again, actually backfires. Because when we punish ourselves and we feel really bad, remember I was saying it hurt people hurt people. When we punish ourselves for making mistakes, it makes us feel worse. And then as we're feeling bad, we're really mean to people. And then we make more mistakes and we hurt more people. So guilt is a downward cycle. We just don't need it.
I heard Brene Brown say this, and I think it was the book Daring Greatly, that guilt says that we did something bad, but shame says that we are bad. And they're two very different emotions in many ways. And I love that you name shame first because it has to do with our intrinsic value. And then guilt is kind of more like a secondary value of like something that you did and how you list that. I think that's really great.
And they're the two most destructive. A lot of times we don't even know we're living our life just surrounded in shame and guilt. But if we're not happy, those are going to be two parts of that equation. But we can heal them both. And so the way I recommend actionable step, like the actionable step to heal guilt, the mind is constantly saying, you messed this up, you messed this up. I can't believe you said that. Like you're so stupid, whatever it is your mind is saying. I just started to counteract it. So every morning I started to write, what's one thing I did really well yesterday? Just one thing. And I would sit there sometime. I still do this every day. It's the very first thing I do. I sit down with a cup of coffee and I just write down one thing I did really well the day before. And it doesn't have to be like I solved, the equation for how to end cancer. It can be, I cooked dinner for my family yesterday. I did. And my 7-year-old, so one of my other daughters, cooked it with me. And I was like, I went to her. My wife was going to basketball with one of the other kids. And I said, hey, Kelly, instead of watching TV, what if we both put on our aprons and you are the chef? You're going to cook the entire dinner and I'm just going to be there as your sous chef by your side. And she's like, I love it. And so we put on our aprons and she cooked the dinner and I just helped her. She didn't touch any hot stoves. And so this morning when I get to my journal and I'm thinking, what's one thing I did really well? Like I made Kelly feel really special. What this does is this starts to build this, instead of all the things I do wrong, it's all the things I do right. When I start to notice everything I'm doing right, then I start to notice everything everyone around me is doing right. And I start to be this uplifting, affirming force. And what's crazy is people love when you notice what they're doing right. And so as you're like noticing what they're doing right and you're feeling good about yourself for all the things you're doing right, your energy and your vibration turns into a really happy vibration and you get rid of the guilt.
What are your thoughts on toxic positivity and overly exuding happiness when the hard emotions come up, right? Because I think a lot of times in family constellation therapy, even I've got one foot in the spiritual and I've got one foot in the physical, and I'm navigating both for the client. I'm trying to say, well, this is what you went through, but this is the spiritual evolution that's available to you. And sometimes I try to be all the time, I try to be extra careful not to spiritually bypass people's human experiences. And I was recently in a therapy session with my therapist a couple of weeks ago. And I said, I don't like living in Denver. I don't want to be here anymore, but I'm trying to be so positive and I'm trying to make sure that I make the best out of the situation. And she goes, Kat, you hate it there. Stop trying to bypass, your feelings about it. Stop trying to be toxically positive about it. If you hate it, you hate it. So what would you give to advice for someone like me who's trying to find the happiness and trying to find the positivity in a very frustrating, challenging situation?
Well, I like what your therapist said a lot. And this is so my path to happiness is not toxic positivity and it's not ignoring the negative moods. The first half of the book is about how to conquer the 8 negative moods. They're all trying to help us. So this emotion of hate is like a disgust or an anger, and that's a really positive mood. It's a negative mood. It doesn't feel good to hate something, like hating the place that you live. but it's there because it wants you to change.
Mm.
So for me, I would listen to that. I always say, so I get negative moods all the time. And I use a pen and paper. So if I was hating the place I lived, if I said, man, I just hate it here, I wouldn't say I love it, I love it, I love it, I love it. I know that's a lie. We're not about lies. It's not going to work. So I would say, okay, there's some things I like about it. First thing I would do is I would say, okay, I hate it. What am I going to do about it? So can I move? So Kat, can you move?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thinking about it.
Thinking about it. There you go. So this is what anger does. And this is the emotion of hate. This is anger. Anger is actually emotion 7. So there's 8 negative moods. There's 8 positive moods. Shame is emotion 1. It's the worst. It's the lowest. 7 is way more positive than 1. So at anger, we get into a really positive thing where we're like, I have the energy to change. We usually only change when we get angry about something enough. So anger is the emotion of change. Martin Luther King used his anger in a peaceful way to say, this is enough. Gandhi used his anger in a peaceful way to say, this is enough. Both men changed the world. But there was the emotion of anger that said, we're not going to put up with this anymore. We're not going to put up with this oppression. So I would look at it anytime I'm angry and I'm like, or frustrated or upset with something, I say, what needs to change? Because there's something in me, maybe it's my soul, is trying to communicate with me, is trying to say something about this isn't right. And I'd say, well, what isn't right? Well, where I live isn't right. Great. What can I do about it? And then you take action.
Mm.
If I was in a situation where I couldn't do anything, I just don't believe that's a thing. So I just don't believe that's a thing. I don't think that there's ever a situation that you would be angry about that you couldn't do anything about, unless I guess, okay, I take that back. So some people might have been angry about like the election results, and then you can't do anything about the election results. Well, but you can. So maybe I can't change the president, but what is it about the president I'm angry about? What is it that I don't like? Okay, I don't like egotistical pride. Well, then that's something for me. That's advice for me. I won't live with egotistical pride. Maybe there's somebody in my life that lives with egotistical pride, and that's somebody I need to distance myself from. So it's always a message. It's always some type of a message. I'm trying to be useful here because there might be somebody that's listening that says, I really can't do anything about it. I don't like where I live and I cannot move because such and such and such and such a situation. Well, in that case, I would make the best of it, not by lying about liking it. I'd say, what are the things I do like about it? How could I lean into those more? What are the places I want to be? Could I do a month in Costa Rica? Is that possible? Well, maybe my job won't allow it. Okay, well, what are some ways that I could travel within my constraints? How could I make some changes and take some action so that I'm eventually going to be happy with the way that my life is? Mm. And that's, if we just never say there's nothing I can do and throw my hands up, then we're a victim. But if we never choose to be a victim, and I'll never choose to be a victim, we can always find a way to satisfy ourselves.
I hope people heard your very nuanced frame shift of perspective. I really hope people heard those words. And if you didn't, if you're just consciousness is coming back into the conversation, go back, tap back 30 seconds back, go listen to what Matt just said again. It's a very subtle perspective shift that he's offering that your life is always in your hands, and your happiness is your responsibility. And the way that you view your life and the control that you do have with certain aspects of your life, because usually we're not in control of a lot of things that happen around us, but our response to things we are in control of, we can be in control of. And you brought up the victim mindset and the victim mentality. And when we're working with ancestral healing, a lot of people that come to me for this work, they are victims of something. They have been a victim of something. And I always say, yes, you were a victim of something, and it did drastically shape and impact the way that you view yourself and you view the world. But if you stay in that and you don't ever grow from that experience or whatever you need to do to move forward, it's almost like it becomes your whole life story. And some people don't know how to find happiness or find a way forward or find a pathway from their victimhood. What are your thoughts on that when it comes to happiness? If someone's listening to this and they do feel that way, what would your advice be for them?
We've all been a victim. Any adult that is not currently in a toxic, abusive relationship, which is going to be 99% of the people listening, you're not a victim right now. We've all been a victim when we were too small to defend ourselves, and we needed the care and we just needed somebody to rely on us to survive. And so if they abused us, we were a victim. But once I became 18 and I was on my own, I was no longer a victim, other than my own thinking that I was still a victim.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, I had to take responsibility for my life as it was. And I wasn't. When I still was holding on to this victim thoughts that my life is bad because, I had an abusive father. He was mostly emotionally abusive, just a little bit physically abusive. But still it messed me up because it was crazy warfare. So then I was like, well, shoot, I might as well just go into substances. And I was a daily user of all kinds of substances. And then I was a victim, but it was me. I was doing it. Mm-hmm. Once I woke up that I'm responsible now. Maybe I wasn't responsible for the way I was treated when I was too small to defend myself, but right now it is my responsibility to do with my life and to make of my life. Mm-hmm. That's when everything started to change. We cannot have any victim story in this moment and have happiness. The two things cannot coincide. So you can't be a victim and be happy.
Does that victim mentality fuel the shame?
Well, it just says we're powerless.
Speak on the powerlessness when it comes to happiness, because I think there's a connection there.
Absolutely. If I'm a victim, that means I can't do anything to improve this. And that's just not true. So once I own it, once I say, okay, I may not be responsible for what was done to me, but I'm responsible for what I do today. I'm responsible for everything today. That means I'm responsible for my own happiness. I can't blame my unhappiness on anyone else anymore. There's no one to blame. At this moment, I'm fully responsible for my life. I'm fully responsible for my happiness. And so once we make that choice, then we can start to choose happiness. That's the second positive emotion in the progression of moods is responsibility. I don't want to minimize anyone's situation. I don't want to say that you weren't abused physically, sexually, emotionally. I'm sure that many people were, and they have every right to feel like a victim. But today, you're not a victim right now, and it is your choice to continue to feel like it. No one will blame you for feeling like a victim. You have every right in the world to feel like it. You just can't feel like that and be happy. So we have to set it aside. We have to say that happened. I didn't wish for it to happen. I wouldn't wish for it to happen to anyone ever again. But today I'm going to choose to be responsible for my life. And responsible is response able. I am able to respond to everything right now. So how am I going to make my choices? And that's, I tell the story in that chapter of David Goggins. David was a victim in every sense of the word. His father, Tunis, was awful. Like, it was crazy abuse. At age 7, he had a gun in his mouth. David was wetting his bed every single night, and like his father beat him senseless, and he got an ear infection because of it. And his mom snuck him off to the hospital. And then she got home because she's trying to take care of her kid that's been beaten by his dad. He beats his mother senseless for spending his money on the hospital. And so this kid is a victim, and definitely a victim. And then when he grows up, he's like 18, and he's balloons up to 300 pounds in weight again, because this is what we do. He's stuffing all of his feelings with food. He hadn't learned he was response able yet. And one day his job is to go spray restaurants for cockroaches. And one night he's in this fast food restaurant and he sees a nest of cockroaches, and he sprays the spray in the middle of the night, and thousands of cockroaches swarm and they cover him. Cockroaches everywhere. And he just finally, so I was saying anger is good. He finally gets so angry, he throws his spray down, he throws the cockroaches off him, and he says, enough of this. And that morning he drives through Dunkin' Donuts and he picks up a dozen donuts, which was his thing. And he eats a dozen donuts. And as he's watching the infomercial at like 4 a.m., he sees this thing for the Navy SEALs. And he said, I'm going to be a Navy SEAL. And he shows up to the Navy SEALs office and he said, I want to be a SEAL. And they said, man, you're almost aged out. I don't know. He was like 26 or something like that. And you age out at a certain time and you can't be a SEAL. They said, you've got 3 months before you age out and you're 100 pounds heavier than we would allow you. And you have to pass this test. And so he looked in the mirror and he called this his accountability mirror. And every single day he looked in that mirror and he said, I'm going to do this. And he did like 5 workouts a day. He lost 100 pounds in 3 months, passed the written test, and then became one of the greatest endurance athletes in the world, completing races of hundreds of miles. He did 4,000 pull-ups in a single day. Like, he's just an inspiration. And this is what's cool, is that your pain can become your purpose. So the name of David's book is called Can't Hurt Me. He now says nothing can hurt me. Like, what he endured as a child became his greatest superpower, because he said, I went through that and I'm still here. I can put myself through what other people can't put me through. Right. And so same with me. I wouldn't have written The Good Mood Revolution if I'd had the dad I always wanted. And so there's a lot of benefits that can come from some of this abuse that we might have endured. And now it's like, now that we're an adult, we're saying, how can I use that pain and turn it into purpose and really make the world and my life a better place?
That is the key, is taking radical responsibility for your life. And the more we make excuses for the way that we behave, the more we perpetuate the story of that victimhood. I've never heard someone tell David Goggins' story so succinctly and profoundly like you just did. I mean, my fiance is really into David Goggins, but when you put it in that way, it really, I kind of got teary-eyed. It's like, wow, the human body and the human mind is capable of so much more. Yeah, love that. That's incredible. So on that note, how do we break the feeling bad habit? Besides taking responsibility for ourselves, which I'm sure even that seems a little like, well, how do I, okay, so I have to be responsible and response able, but like, what are some other ways that we can shift out of that somebody could do right now listening to the episode? Hey everyone, it's Kat popping in during the episode today to tell you about my free cycle breaker quiz. Do you ever feel like you're the black sheep of your family, or maybe you find yourself stuck in the same family patterns or dynamics over and over again with no relief? Well, what if I told you you could transform that role into something really, really powerful? When you take my cycle breaker quiz, I help you understand the childhood coping tools that are showing up in your adult life today. And by understanding how you show up with your family and the role you play, this can be the portal into understanding the patterns of your lineage. Ready to embrace your role? Go to catdow.com/cyclebreaker to take the quiz, or visit the link in the show notes below. Your transformation from black sheep to cycle breaker starts right now.
Well, I want to, let's have an actionable thing on this. So my actionable thing and responsibility is just make a commitment right now that you will never allow yourself to feel like a victim again. And I always use the example of, if you get in a car wreck and it wasn't your fault, you are responsible for fixing your car, to going to the hospital, to healing yourself. The person who hit you, sure, their insurance may pay for some things, but they're not responsible for healing you. You are. I used that example far too many times, because my wife and I were driving some friends to dinner 6 months ago, and we got T-boned by a lady who just totally blew through a stop sign. She hit us so hard, our car went up on 2 wheels. It totaled this brand new car that I had. And I'm like, first thing I do is everyone okay? And thank God everyone was okay. And then the person who hit us was okay. And her daughter that was in the car with her was okay. And so I'm like, all right, am I going to live it? Am I going to say, like, for me, I'm just, there was no way, like, she hadn't even tapped the brakes. There's no way for me to just drive and not trust that someone is going to stop at a stop sign, because they just do. You stop at stop signs. And so while the T-bone accident I was a victim to that accident, and I had just bought the car. It was my dream car. It was exactly what I wanted. It was a 2024 Range Rover Defender. Nice. And it was beautiful. It was awesome. And we were so happy to have it. And then it just gets totaled the next day. And I'm like, Now, I wasn't responsible for the accident, but I am responsible for everything after, right? I'm responsible for my attitude right now, for how I'm going to treat this person who's hit us, if I'm going to be upset with her, if I'm going to make sure she's okay. I'm responsible for us still having a fun time tonight. So we ended up walking, doing the police stuff, and then walking to a new spot for dinner. And we had just a great night. And then the insurance company didn't want to pay the insurance for the new car, and they didn't want to give me the money for the car that was hit. And so I was responsible for staying on top of them. It took 5 months, but it was my responsibility to keep calling them. And finally, to get a check for the car, it took 5 months where I'm driving a rental car, but I was responsible for it. In any moment that I wanted to fall into, this isn't fair, and how dare this insurance company not pay this? It wasn't my fault. Anytime I moved into that thinking, I was like, no, I refuse to be a victim. So it's just a simple mantra. I refuse to be a victim, and I'm always responsible. And I would just bring myself back. I'm responsible. I'm responsible for taking care of this. And then that would make me feel powerful again. And that was some happiness. But you'd ask the question, what else can we do? So there are a few things. And the first is that all unhappiness comes from the mind. You said something really powerful very early in the conversation. You said, could we rise up into our higher self and look down at our smaller self, at the person that's going through all the upset? Well, in this moment, it's a wonderful moment, other than our thinking. So every day, start with some type of prayer or meditation. If you don't know how to pray or meditate, it's a really easy thing to do. I do both. I love to pray and I love to meditate. But meditation is really simple. We just focus on our breath. And it's a practice, because we spend all day attached to our thoughts, thinking our thoughts are ours, and they're not. Our thoughts are what make us unhappy. The brain has a job to think, and I'll give us a little example here. Kat, could you tell your heart to stop beating for 5 minutes?
I mean, I could hold my breath.
Could you hold your breath for 5 minutes?
Yeah, maybe if I really tried. No.
No, I can't.
Yeah.
I think the world record maybe is like 18 minutes, but
wow.
For me, if I try to hold my breath for 2 minutes, I'm gasping for air. If I try to tell my heart to stop beating, it just keeps on beating. If I try to tell my hair to stop growing, it keeps growing. So we can't command our heart to stop beating. It has a job. Its job is to beat. We can't command our lungs to stop breathing. It has a job. Its job is to breathe. We can't command our mind to stop delivering thoughts to us. So if we try to tell our brain, don't think for 5 minutes, we'll fail. Its job is to deliver thoughts to us. Our heart is beating to keep us alive. Our lungs are breathing to keep us alive. Our brain is giving us thoughts to keep us alive. It's just a piece of survival hardware. But we are not our heart, and we are not our lungs. We know this because somebody can have a heart transplant and they keep living. So it's not their heart. We're not this heart. We also know we could have a lung transplant. I don't know about brain transplant, but we're not our brain either. We have a brain, we have a heart, we have lungs. So meditation is a chance for us to feel our heart beating and just to be aware of it. It's a chance to feel. This is why, when I meditate, a lot of times I'll put my hand on my heart and I'll feel my heartbeat. Or it's a chance for us to notice our lungs breathing and just to be aware of it. And it's a chance for us to notice our thoughts thinking and to be aware of it. Now, I'm not my heartbeat, I'm not my lungs, and I'm not these thoughts. I'm the one who notices these things. And if we just spend a little bit of time each morning, it could be 5-10 minutes, just noticing these things, our thoughts become less personal. So the next time the thought shows up and it says, you should be really angry with this person, you can say, that's not even my thought. That's just a thought my brain is giving me to try to help me survive. Am I going to attach to that one, or am I just going to let that one go? Thoughts are like clouds that show up in the sky. Just a cloud appears, a thought appears. And if I don't attach to it, it can just float by. And then the blue sky of happiness can remain. Without our thoughts, this moment is really joyful. So a meditation practice is a wonderful way to train ourselves to not get so attached to these negative thoughts.
I love that. These are great examples of just easy things that people can do right now. And the beautiful thing about everything you've said in this conversation is that when it comes to ancestral healing, just implementing these few new practices, you build new neural pathways in your brain that eventually affect the way that your response system, your nervous system works. That changes your epigenetics. And then all of a sudden, you've broken a cycle and the next generation doesn't have to pay for the pain that you inherited. So there's so much mind, body, and energy healing in this conversation around happiness. And the last question I want to ask you before we sign off the conversation is, tell us about the contentment versus happiness argument. Because I've heard so many people say happiness is not something you should achieve. You should achieve for contentment. And in the beginning of the episode, you said we can have both.
So it's a progression of emotions. Joy, happiness, happiness and joy. To me, it's synonymous. But we can split hairs over what the definition is. For me, we know what it feels like to feel really joyful and happy. It feels amazing, right? We are as joyful as we love the present moment. So, Kat, think of a day that was a really joyful day. What's a day in your life that was just really happy?
When I got engaged.
On that day that you got engaged, congratulations.
Thanks.
And it's such as on that day, you loved your reality.
Mm-hmm.
You loved that he was asking you and that you were able to say yes. You loved that you were going to make this life together. Everything about that day, you just I just love the way reality is. Mm-hmm. And that is how we are happy. So any day that we choose to totally love our reality is a happy day.
Even in the mess.
Can we love the mess?
Well, that's the journey, I think, is learning. That's been my journey, is learning to love the mess. And as you said, those bad mood emotions, right? Learning that mm-hmm. there's a light and a dark, there's a positive and negative for everything. And anger's been a catalyst and depression's been a catalyst for certain things. So it's definitely a perspective shift for sure.
Yeah, so we can start to love the depression. We can start to love the anger. I always say when we have a negative emotion, if we just understand what the message is and then take positive action, it subsides. The negative emotion is just asking us to do something. So I can love the negative emotion as long as I'm choosing to do something about it. But so joy will come when we love our reality with no conditions. So the day that you got engaged, you just loved everything that was happening. It was just perfect. But every day could be perfect if we chose to treat it that way. Now, contentment. Contentment is this idea that I'm just satisfied and at peace with everything that's going on. This is actually a higher emotion than joy. We get to that space. Now, this is we're very spiritually evolved if we can just be at peace all the time. But we get to that space when we've gone through enough trials and figured out that it's all just benefiting us. Every single thing is benefiting us, that we no longer worry about the future. We say, I can handle anything that's coming because I know everything that's coming is for my learning, for my growth, and for my ultimate benefit. So I'm at peace with whatever may come. And then we could just be fully content in this moment and with the future. Two different emotions. They both are achievable. I prefer to feel as joyful as I can while also being at peace with what's coming. So that's my explanation of contentment and happiness.
One of my favorite sayings or mottos for this work is yes and. I don't like black and white thinking. It was programmed into me from my survival immigrant mentality in my family. It's like, you got to hustle, everything's black and white. There's no gray area. We need certainty. And living in the yes and has been really healing for me to kind of just make space for everyone and everything. And so I love that perspective on it. That's really great.
Well, I appreciate you having me on today.
I am so happy that you came on. Literally, I'm joyful that you came on the episode. I think that this is going to leave people in a really awesome place to keep diving into your work. And also pick up the book, Good Mood Revolution. Tell the audience where they can find the book, where they can connect with you, where they can continue their happiness journey with you.
Yeah, the easiest way to plug in, I do a weekly podcast as well. Nice. It's called The Good Mood Revolution. And so, people are already listening to your podcast, top 5% in the world. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And if you're looking for a second podcast to add to your repertoire, check out the Good Mood Revolution. Just every week we talk about a different tip on how to be happier.
Nice. I love that. What is one last thought from the heart that you want to share with everyone and something memorable that they remember you by?
Just appreciation and gratitude for the work you're doing. Like,
Mm.
you have just blown me away. The way that you're very bold and you're very brave with your beliefs. I happen to agree with the way that you believe and the way that you see the world, but I think you're just making a huge difference in people's lives.
Thank you. That's really sweet. That's really sweet of you. Sometimes it feels like it's going against everything I was raised with to speak on this stuff, but try to help others as I've been helped. So thank you for that. All right. Can people find you on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn?
Yeah. So the handle is Good Mood Matt on all of those platforms. And then my website is mattoneil.com.
Awesome, Matt. Thank you so much for all your wisdom and knowledge today. And guys, go give Matt a follow and pick up his book and let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks.